Show it.
Show it.
Show it.
When voting this election day, November 6th, you will be asked, but not required, to show a photo ID. To learn more about how to get a photo ID for future elections, call 1-877-VOTES-PA or visit votespa.com.
Governor, we're going to start with voter ID. I can't imagine any of our listeners or web viewers don't know this yet, but a Commonwealth Court ruling has effectively postponed enforcement of voter ID until next year. The law still stands, but there was a lot of judicial discomfort about the window of time left before the election. First, your reaction to the decision by Judge Robert Simpson for the temporary injunction.
Well, I'm somewhat surprised that he has this discomfort. This law has been in existence since March. What is that, 6 months to go and have the opportunity to go get the photo ID? Everybody knows it. If you don't know it, your friends and neighbors haven't told you, you haven't seen it on radio, you haven't read it or heard it on radio, seen it on TV, read the newspapers. It's been the subject of discussion now for months and months and months. I don't agree with the decision, but I abide by the decision. I've been a lawyer for over 35 years, so I understand when the court rules, the court rules.
Hours after that decision, you indicated that the state likely would not appeal. I mean, you didn't close the door entirely. Are you still there?
I'm not closing the door entirely. We still have to talk about it. The question is, if we appeal, is the Supreme Court going to do anything about it? Supreme Court already, to my friends on the Supreme Court, they punted once in sending it back. If it goes up there, does it end up in a 3-3 vote, which would uphold it? So I have to look at the likelihood also.
Now, the man who sponsored the ID law basically wrote it, lashed out on the day the decision came down, and he did so in typical Daryl Metcalf form, calling it judicial activism and piling on some other colorful language, including calling anyone who doesn't have an ID yet lazy. Do you agree?
I'm not going to call people names. That's it.
Governor, about the 20% of us or so who showed up for the primary in April got to experience what was being called a soft rollout of the voter ID law. Is that what voters can expect in November, on November 6th? And for those who were not a part of the primary, what can they expect on Election Day?
Well, it's a good question. We were talking about it with the Secretary of State and the people in the Elections Bureau. But it's also we need to have the cooperation of the counties and in their election departments and the people at the polls. I think we should still be requiring not requiring, but asking for the photo ID to get people used to the idea. And, if people are told that next year you're going to need, as of right now, next year you're going to need photo ID, I think we get to next year, there's no excuse at this point.
You have to be happy that the constitutionality of the law seems to be upholding well in court.
Right. And we're not surprised. The same, almost identical law was passed in Indiana, went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and was upheld there. So I'm not surprised by this.
And while the plaintiffs are still fighting for that permanent injunction, presumably after the election, is there any doubt in your mind that come May of 2013 that we will have a photo ID requirement in place for voters?
No, I believe when we get to May of next year, there will be a photo ID requirement.
Are there any legal issues? I mean, this has been so confusing about the courts tossing it up and back between Commonwealth and Supreme. Are there any legal issues that really have yet to be resolved before it really does become law for sure in the spring of next year?
Well, there's a request still for a permanent injunction
right.
that the judge has set a date in December to hear. I don't see him passing a permanent injunction, which would just basically void the law, even though it was a constitutional law. So I think he's determined it's constitutional. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has determined it's constitutional. I think that come next May, you'll see it being enforced.